All right, here we are in week 12, nearing the end of the semester here. And today we're going to talk a little bit about two main things, collaboration between professionals and families, and also different ways or contexts or situations in which you might have the opportunity to interact with parents or family members. For the assignments for this week, I'm going to ask that you just focus on some of the bigger things that are coming up, the communication experiments and the family involvement and communication plan, which I'll outline at the end of this PowerPoint. So you don't really have anything due this week. Okay, your normal practice, demonstrate, QQC, and self-reflection stuff. Don't worry about it for this week, for week 12. Just focus on these bigger tasks. So in terms of collaboration, the main thing, the most important thing to realize with collaboration is that it's important. That's really the main highlight here. And what a collaboration really means is a partnership or um, uh, an understood relationship of being on the same team, working toward the same goal. That is between families and the professionals. When that's there, when that's present, when there are strong relationships between families and professionals, children tend to do a lot better. They tend to have better grades, better attendance, better behaviors, and things like that. Um, a couple of other things that really correlates to student success and children well-being is parent involvement and father involvement. Um, the parent involvement doesn't necessarily just mean an active interest in the child's life, although that is a major part of it. It also tends to point to the parents or the family members playing an active role in the children's school life. So being in contact with the teacher, being present for certain things, volunteering, things like that in the school setting. Um, so there are different ways that a teacher or a professional might interact with parents and community members. And it's really important to think about these different opportunities and how they might arise so that you can take advantage of them when they do. Um, in addition to being aware of the possible opportunities for communicating successfully, it might also be wise to consider the possible barriers to communicating. So different diversity issues or other types of boundaries that might be a difficulty of working through. It's going to be something that you might consider for preparation, so you can try to work through these barriers as smoothly as possible to maintain the strongest relationship and the strongest partnership with families as you can. And it's important to remember in relation to these things that it's actually the school's responsibility to reach out to the families. The families have a duty in a certain sense because they're responsible for their children's upbringing, but in terms of technical, professional, and ethical even obligation, we, the professionals, are responsible as advocates for the child to reach out to families as much as possible when we feel it will be helpful. So, in doing this, we're setting an impression for the parents or for the family members. So, we have to represent ourselves well. So, developing a welcoming school, or regardless of where you are, if you're in a therapy office or if you're in a child care setting, presenting a certain face of what you represent by the physical space, the physical environment that the parent or the family member sees is really, really important to establish that strong and positive impression in their minds. One way that schools have found to be helpful in doing this is asking everyone to go to the office before they just enter into the schools. Now, of course, there's two main reasons that that's the case, and one is very much a safety reason, and that's very helpful and really critical that everyone is checked in. Everyone, the school administration knows who's in and who's out of the building. That's just a general safety feature of places where children are watched after. And the other main reason, one might say, is that if we're funneling all visitors into a certain building through the same channel, that is, through the main office, through the main entranceway, then we, the professional, actually has more of control over what visual and atmospheric impression is made. In other words, we get to set up what everyone sees and experiences as they enter the building, right? And that's actually pretty important. If we're wanting to make and establish an impression of the place, to represent ourselves as a welcoming school or a welcoming facility, a place that advocates and encourages open warmth and relationship building, then being able to present that face as the front of the school or the front of the facility is going to be to our advantage, or we could play it to our advantage. This isn't something that's meant to be underhanded or anything. We're not setting any illusion about it. We're actually presenting our face honestly to the parents or the families, and we just want them to be able to see it as clearly as possible. So that's has a lot to do with the physical environment of what parents and families walk into, and the social environment has more to do, of course, with how they're greeted, how they are interacted with inside the building, and that's very much where the types of communication skills we've been talking about comes into play. Other somewhat smaller things, but still significant, might be being mindful of how we present signage in the building. That means, directions, written out directions of what hall you're on or where to go or things like that. And it's useful to know your demographic in your area, to know what other languages might be useful to put on those signs. It could be a very overwhelming and even frightening experience to walk into a place not knowing where to go and not really being able to read what signs are there to point to where you go. So if there's a high Hispanic population, for instance, if there's a high Chinese population, or whatever else there is, maybe including some of those languages in the signs of the building will increase a welcoming feeling there. Now, with the social environment, having a positive attitude and showing that positive attitude are pretty essential. So when you're greeting a parent, it might even seem pretty obvious to say, but maybe smile at them or have some sort of openness or warmth toward them so that they know that you care about interacting with them in a positive way. Now, you all are probably fairly good at doing that, and I'm only bringing it up because it's not only just good courtesy, but it's actually really strongly important to developing an initial impression of you and of the school, so that the relationship that builds off of that can be the strongest that it possibly can. A common way that parents might enter into a school or child care facility is something like an open house, and open houses can be really useful tools to begin building those relationships. Another way that you might, as a professional, find yourself interacting with children is through and their families is through home visits. So if you work in a young child care setting, it might be the case that you are asked to go to all your students' homes before the school year starts. This can be a wonderful chance to greet the child into what will be their school year with you. But it's also a way for you to see the family as they work, as they live their world, and for them to see you in that world, in that familiar place. And for young children who are worried about school or who are hesitant about this new transition they may be going into, this can be really crucial. They see you in a place that's been completely their familiar zone for their whole lives. And when they see you welcomed there, and when they see you comfortable there, it can make the transition for them to move into a different space, into a different environment, that is the school environment, much, much easier. And even if it's not a prerequisite for you as a professional, even if it's not required of you, you might consider asking if it's okay to do it anyway. that would be it can be a really helpful way to start the year on so many levels. So even if you're not required to do it, you might think about it. There's some recommendations in your text about how to go about doing this, what to expect, and and some recommendations about getting started with it. And something else you might think about in terms of transitioning. So, transitioning a young child into a new setting, the school setting or the early child care setting, you might think about pairing a new family with the family that's already at the facility where you work. Okay, so if that applies to you, if you're in a place like that, then you might consider putting in contact two families, one that's been there and pretty familiar with things, with another family whose child is very new. It might be helpful not just for the child but for the family as well to be able to just pick up on things that you kind of have to live through to learn, different expectations to be had, things like that. It can be helpful for the new family. So let's talk a little bit about different opportunities to interact or to communicate with you as the professional and the families. And one main opportunity is a formal meeting. That's when, of course, something's set on the calendar, a conference or an IEP meeting or something like that. And that's, has a formal stop and start time, and you can use those times to delve into the content of what the meeting's about, but also to let it provide you an opportunity to communicate with the families at more of a depth. Okay, so continue building the relationships. Other less formal ways, like simply seeing them when they're dropping off or picking up their child, as you just kind of walk by, maybe even if you see them in public. Those are all more informal conversations, but they can be used very much for the continual building of relationships by using some of the communication skills we've talked about in the last several weeks to allow them to see you and to allow them to feel like you're really attuned to them and interested and engaged with them and their child. Other ways that you might exercise your responsibility to reach out might be something like phone calls or letters or emails or different things that you might send home with children every day. Now, with things like this, you don't want it to be only used when there's a problem. And that's a challenge because it can be hard to keep up with all of the phone calls and letters and emails and things you would like to make. But it can be used really beneficially if those calls and letters and emails are actually well balanced with positive check-ins or encouragement calls with something of more concern like behavioral issues and things like that. So try to schedule it out if you can to make consistent contact through calls or written form with the families. If you don't have anything to say, try to find something encouraging or positive, and you should be able to find something. But even if you just want to touch